for attending our joint meeting between the City Council, the Downtown Development Authority, the Planning Commission, and the Zoning Board of Appeals. The last time the city hosted a joint meeting was in May 2021. The two joint workshops we are having this week are intended to bring all of our boards and commissions together to discuss the topics related to our master plan. Review consisting of parking, development, infrastructure, and much more. The master plan is an important document that helps determine the future of our city, and we look forward to everyone's input and hard work that will go into this. We are encouraging maximum participation from members of all of our boards and commissions this evening. In order to best do this, we will be breaking up the presentation into sections, and after each section, Joe Tangeri will pause the presentation to allow for input and questions. So during the presentation, please feel free to write down any questions or comments you have to share during the dedicated portion for commenting. If you could also please state your name and the board that you serve on before your question, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, thank you so much for attending at this point. Joe Tangeri from Giffords Webster will provide the presentation. Joe?
All right, thank you. Get my screen sharing going here. All right, well, thank you for being here. This is the first in a series of two. We're going to do the exact same thing tomorrow night. So anyone who could not attend tonight, certainly welcome to attend tomorrow. Anyone who could attend tonight is also welcome to attend again tomorrow, if you so choose. But we wanted to have a couple opportunities for people to participate and get the presentation. So by way of introduction, we have kind of dual master plan updates underway. One is the downtown master plan, and the other one is an updated, more general master plan for the full city. The public input platform for the master plan is live. We have a workshop upcoming for the DDA plan in November as well. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Just for background, for anyone who might be watching at home or watching this on YouTube, a master plan in the state of Michigan is statutorily the responsibility of a planning commission. And the planning commission develops and adopts a master plan, and the city council has the option of also adopting the plan when it's completed. And the statute calls for a review of the master plan every 5 years. So we're at the 5-year mark with the city's master plan. The downtown master plan was adopted in 2016. It has been reviewed in the meantime, but we are actually doing a little bit of an update on that right now. So just to remind us all of the scope of these plans, the downtown master plan update is being funded by the DDA. It's an update of that 2016 plan. It includes an update of the 2016 assessment of the downtown. We already did the walkabout for that. We're reviewing parking and traffic assessments that have been completed over the last few years. We're providing some analysis of potential opportunities for more parking, analyzing the potential for a 14-mile road diet with diagonal parking. And we are going to be holding a public workshop with accompanying survey next month. For the general master plan, this is funded by the city. It's a subject-focused update of the 2018 master plan. So we developed a few modules when we were putting together the scope for the plan. One of those modules focused on infrastructure. Then I'll be getting into a little more detail on each of these. So if you're scratching your head about any of them, just hold your horses. Baker and Shalom sites were another module. Parking, sustainability and resiliency plan, mixed use development, and then some corridor assessments, specifically the BRD1 district, which is in the South Main corridor south of downtown, and the BRD2 district, which is over in the Crooks corridor and along a portion of Maple. North Main, so Main north of downtown up to about Elwood, and then west 14 Mile, so between about Washington and Manitou. Whenever we start a planning process, we want to familiarize ourselves with the context in which we're working. So I've got a series of slides here just to give everybody a little bit of background information on where the city is and where we've been, where we're headed. So our population peaked in 1970. I think most people are aware of that. We were at about 17,617 people then. In 2010, it was down to 11,825, and we're at 11,389 as of 2020, down 3.8% from 2010. Projected to go back up a little bit by SEMCOG by 2050, not quite to 12,000. When we look at how the population breaks down regionally, the population of school-age children is declining. Clawson's is no exception. We're down in all three of those age groups since 2000. When we look around the region at our neighboring communities and the county, we can see that the county is growing actually at a decent clip relative to the state, which grew 2% from 2010 to 2020. And our immediate neighbors have grown, and Clawson and Madison Heights are the two that have shrunk. And we'll get into a little bit about what's driving that decline in population on this next slide here. So a big part of the reason that we have fewer people now than we did in 2010 is that our household size has continued to decline at a somewhat faster rate than the rest of the state. So we have an average household size of about 2.02 people, which is quite a bit lower than Michigan's, which is 2.48. And that's partly a function of the fact that we have a lot of single person households. 42% of our households are single person households. And less than 20% of our households have children. Whereas if you go back to 1970, when we had that population of 17,000, a lot of households had children in them, and there were almost no single person households at the time. So the composition of households is really what has driven the gradual decline in population. And this has happened in a lot of places. Clawson's certainly not unique in that regard. But a few of our neighboring communities have, for various reasons, managed to buck that trend recently. And we'll talk a little bit about what might be driving that as well. We have about 5,600 households total. Our number of seniors living alone rose from 643 in 2010 to 866 in 2020. That's 15% of all of our households as a senior citizen living alone. When we look at our household data, I want to note a little bit about the ACS, the American Community Survey, which is where these numbers come from. These are estimates that are drawn from a sample, and there is a margin of error. So if the numbers don't line up 100%, that's why. One data set might talk about the number of occupied housing units, and the other might talk about households, and they might be a couple off from each other. And it's just because of the way the ACS is developed by the US Census Bureau. But we have a 3.6% vacancy rate. According to the ACS, it rose to 4% in 2021, but 3.6 to 4% is actually a pretty negligible increase. Basically, the number of vacant units we have supports a housing market, really. You have to have some vacancy in order to have units for people to move into. We're 71% owner occupied. That's quite a bit higher than the national average. And we're 24% renter occupied. We also have a very small population in group quarters. That would be like, congregate living facilities for seniors and things like that. Our population in group quarters is 119. We don't have very many facilities here. When we look at the housing permits that we've had over the last 23 years, we've had 69 new single-family homes, 23 attached condos, 114 multifamily units. We've had 36 units demolished. So our net total is 170 new units. So we actually have increased the housing supply in Clawson over the last 23 years and over the last 10 as well. Economically, Clawson punches above Michigan's average wage. We have a median household income of 76,575. Michigan is about 12,000 lower than that. Pretty good educational attainment, especially among our total high school grads is higher than the U.S. average. We have fewer people than the U.S. at large with bachelor's degrees or higher. But we are doing pretty well as far as high school graduates. Poverty rate, pretty steady, right around 7.5%. Also looked at just kind of where do people come to Clawson to work from, and where do Clawsonians go to work. So I got the top 5 communities for both of those here. So workers in Clawson. Clawson is the largest contributor to its own workforce at 17.5%. And Royal Oak, Madison Heights, Troy, and Rochester Hills provide round out the top 5 as far as where people are coming from to work in Clawson. And then people who live in Clawson themselves. Troy is the #1 destination for employment, which is not too surprising. It's right next door. And then followed by Detroit, Clawson itself, Royal Oak, and Southfield. About 80% drove alone to work. Major change in the composition of employment and commuting among Clawson residents from 2010 to 2021. You probably could have guessed this, is that in 2010, we had about 280 people who worked from home. And now we have about 930, which is a lot in a community of 11,000 people. We have almost 10% of our workers are working from home. That's a lot. So that's obviously something that we need to think about in terms of how that affects our daytime population, because Clawson's not the only community that's had from home. Those communities that send workers to Clawson during the daytime also have a lot fewer people leaving the house to work. And that means they're sending fewer to Clawson during the day. So that has repercussions for our businesses, naturally, because particularly our midday and convenience businesses, they do rely somewhat on the workforce to provide them with a customer base. Little pause there for any questions or comments. This is a photo actually by Glenn Shepard, who took this photo when we were working on the sustainability framework. If there's any, I'll continue on if we don't have any.
Just going back, if you don't mind. So as far as the homes, real estate market, and what is the turnover rate within Clawson?
In terms of
Homes being sold per year.
Oh, okay. I don't have the number on hand. I can tell you that 87.8% of Clawson households lived in the same home 1 year prior, though. So there is a 10-ish% turnover rate, something like that.
Okay. And do we know of people who have moved from their first residence? Do they stay or do they go to other communities?
That is something that I would have to do some digging on,
Okay.
but I think we could figure that out. Andy is taking a note on that, and we will look up, which we'll have to get a number on first-time home buyers moving into Clawson or buying in Clawson. They might not necessarily be moving into Clawson. They might be renting in Clawson prior to buying. And I'm not sure if there's a data source to tell us that, but I will look to see if I can find one.
So just to recap the question was, do residents stay here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
the retention rate for people who sell.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't happen to have the data on hand, but I'm sure that we can determine that rate. That's why we're doing this. We get good questions. It gives us something else good to put in the plan, right? Any other questions or comments? Move on then. So just a little bit of info about the public outreach so far. Our survey went live in early September. We've had 352 people complete at least one portion of the survey. There's some kind of modules. There's general questions that open the survey. We've got housing, budgeting, parking, sustainability and resiliency, biking, walking, and a map question that allows you to put dots on a map that show where you've experienced an incidence of flooding, for instance. And we've gotten some pretty good actual feedback on that map question. Part of the it's part of informing our infrastructure framework that we're working on. Just to kind of know where the problems are. We obviously have kept track of it from the DPW's perspective, but we want to hear from citizens as well, where there are perceived problems that perhaps may not have risen to the level of, you know, an actual call from the DPW. So we are putting a new push on to get some more people to come and complete that survey. We have a tentative goal of getting about 750 responses. We'll see if we get there. But 352 is already a pretty good rate based on just relative to some of the other surveys for master plans that I've worked on in the last few years. It's very hard to get people's time today. As I think we're all aware, everybody's just got a million things going on, and stopping to fill out a survey, it's an ask in the modern world. So again, we're going to keep pushing. We are planning to keep it open through the end of October. And we'll see where we are at the end of October. If we want some more results, we'll see if we have to do a final push, but hopefully we'll be right around our goal by the end of October. So upcoming opportunities, these are going to be primarily workshop based. However, all of the in-person opportunities that we're going to provide are going to be mirrored online. So anybody who cannot make it to a scheduled workshop will have the opportunity to respond to the same information and give us the same feedback that workshop participants are able to give us. We understand that it doesn't matter what time of day we schedule the workshop in, there's going to be someone who cannot make it because their kid has a soccer game, or if they're still driving home from work or whatever it is. You know, we understand that people just have very busy calendars, and we want to give people the opportunity to do it, you know, on an unscheduled manner as well. And that's something that thankfully technology gives us the ability to do now. The next scheduled workshop is November 14th. That one is about the DDA master plan. So we're going to have a workshop, most likely at City Hall, most likely in the community room. That pertains to the DDA master plan. Other workshops relating to other master plan modules are yet to be scheduled, but we're going to work on getting those on the calendar soon so that we have something to work toward. And when we have a full draft plan, we are going to have an open house for the full draft plan that will also be posted online. Again, trying to mirror the opportunity to provide feedback. If you can't make it in person, tell us what you think online. One thing I wanted to talk about was what a master plan actually does and what it includes. So on their own, master plans don't change anything. We can come up with all these plans, we set goals, we establish that, we want to look at this area for this reason. But future land use map doesn't change the zoning. So there needs to be a guide for implementation of the plan that tells us what to do and how to use those goals to reach destination. So plan will establish ways forward that generally fall into a couple of categories. One is frameworks and the other is action plans. So framework guides how we're going to study a given problem and make decisions about it. So a good example of that is the parking module that we have, and the Planning Commission is actually going to be discussing this at their meeting tonight. It's on their agenda. So we establish a framework for how we're going to review our parking requirements, how we're going to determine where we might have unmet need, how we're going to determine where we might have a surplus. And once we've established that framework in the plan, we can then use that framework as a basis for doing the actual analysis going forward. Action plans give us specific actions that can be taken to implement our plans and meet the goals we set. So, let's say we set a goal to, I don't know, make it easier to bike to downtown from the north eastern quadrant of the community. That's our goal. It's fairly broad. Well, we have to support that goal with certain actions, such as studying which streets might be most suitable. What is the optimal route? So we've got to have a little bit of a framework for that. Developing the framework is the action item, right? And then when you get down the line, you've got other action items, putting up the signage or putting down the paint, and doing the actual design work would be another action item. But what we try to do at the end of a plan is have kind of a whole matrix that speaks to every goal we set and establishes a series of action items. And we categorize those action items. So some of those action items are going to be zoning. That's the primary tool for implementing most master plans. So you're going to have a series of changes that you can make to your zoning ordinance and or zoning map. There will be a zoning plan that's specific to the zoning map and shows, well, we came up with this new district and it doesn't have an equivalent in our current zoning ordinance, so we're going to have to develop the district. That's something a zoning plan might point to. But not everything is going to be zoning. We might have capital improvement related action items. We might have advocacy action items that are more about public outreach or education than any actual change we might make to an ordinance or capital improvement that we might make. But nevertheless, they're still very important. They can actually help with community building. And then the other thing that we want to do with each of the modules that we have, and I don't really have another place to talk about it, so I'll talk about it here, is we want to highlight the connections between those modules, because parking doesn't exist in isolation, infrastructure doesn't exist in isolation. All of these things are connected and they support each other. So when we talk about infrastructure, some of the things that we're going to be talking about dovetail with what we're going to be talking about in our sustainability chapter. And we want to call attention to that right in the body of the plan. So in our sustainability and resiliency chapter, we might have a little sidebar on a page that says connections and talks about how, for instance, passive stormwater infrastructure supports our stormwater and anti-flooding goals from the infrastructure chapter. And then you might have a callback in the other chapter that points to something in the sustainability chapter. But I think it's important to be explicit about the connections right in the plan, so that we're pointing them out to people, because it's a connected system. Just talking a little bit about each module here. So how am I doing on time, Andy?
We're at 27 right now.
Okay. All right, that's not bad. So we've begun talking about this at the Planning Commission. This is our infrastructure module. That includes roads and public utilities. Ultimately, we have a few sub components of that module. One is a thoroughfare plan. The classification of our roads is not really going to change. They are what they are, basically. So that will carry forward from the 2018 plan. Complete streets in our non-motorized plan. We have a bit about that in the 2018 plan, but we're going to try to flesh out some of the points that was making at the time, and turn it into more of a series of implementation items than it was in the last plan. We have a road maintenance framework. Now, we're not going to be identifying specific roads in the master plan that need to be maintained or anything like that. That's what capital improvement planning is for. But we're identifying a framework for determining that, essentially. And that goes hand in hand with the DPW and our engineer, our city engineer, who have all the underlying data that we need to ultimately make those decisions. But we're going to be explicit about how we're going to do it going forward. Same with water and sewer. And then we're also going to be talking about green infrastructure and flood prevention. I know that's on everybody's mind. And certainly Clawson is not the only community in the area that has had lots of problems with flooding. We have an old infrastructure. We have a combined storm and sanitary system. That's true of a lot of Southeast Michigan. Everybody's trying to figure out exactly what to do. And our recommendations in here are going to include everything from things you can build, such as underground detention or a rain garden, all the way to something as simple as leaving a bit of leaf litter along your property line, because it will absorb a lot of rainfall, and it's less likely that rain is going to travel between your property and a neighbor's property. So there's a lot of different levels at which we can act, or in that case of that last example, not act, in order to handle water in our very built up community. And we're going to be talking about a lot of them in this module of the plan. Of course, taxes pay for upkeep of our infrastructure. With no room to expand our built out city, revenue growth comes from a few different places. One is redevelopment. So a site that has development on it and is replaced with new development. Property changing hands uncaps the property taxes, generally speaking, depending on who's buying. Obviously, if it's a nonprofit, that's different. But generally, when property changes hands, you uncap the long capped property tax, and then increased taxes, of course, is the third way that we can grow revenue. So redevelopment figures into most of these modules in one way or another when we think about new development on previously developed sites. So how does a built out community grow in the absence of places to build out? And really the couple ways that are most straightforward are building up and then strategic density. So looking at areas where you might be able to intensify development a little bit without lots of consequences for the rest of the community. And density doesn't just refer to dwelling units either. It can refer to commercial activity as well. Industrial, commercial, and mixed use development have the highest taxable value of any property. So we don't have a ton of industrial land in Clawson. We've got a few industrial uses over on Crooks Road. And then we've got the Rochester Road corridor. So that being the most valuable taxable land in the community, we have to think about how we balance our development so that we can keep the burden on our residents relatively low. The image on the right is from the 2016 downtown plan. These images were used to ask residents and business owners how they felt about their preferred building height downtown. The circled image is what wound up getting adopted in the city center. It's 3 stories with a 3rd floor setback. We did show 4 stories at the time as well. wound up at the 3-story level. But that's something that we are going to revisit in the public input portion of the downtown plan again this time. And it's one of several topics that that last plan called for us to revisit. And we're going to revisit all of them, but that's one that we're looking at. And then, we need to think about it in terms of some of our other corridors as well. If that's going to perhaps be the thing that maybe uncorks a little bit of redevelopment in some places. Mixed use is another one of our focus areas, and that's directly related to some of what you just saw on the other slide. How do we strategically target a little bit more intensity of use in areas that can handle it? So certain corridors of the city and in the downtown area, for focusing a little more on form and design than the actual use that's occurring inside the building, allowing for mixed uses that can help drive redevelopment of underutilized or obsolete sites, can provide more dwelling units as well. The module includes identifying 3 redevelopment ready sites in accordance with the MEDC's Redevelopment Ready Communities program, which we are engaged in. We're actually we have a level of certification in that program, in fact. So we're going to be looking for sites that we can specifically study and engage with the MEDC on some marketing. They actually provide marketing assistance. And the city doesn't have to own those sites. They can partner with the landowner as well. We have a couple of larger sites that we know are in the midst of being marketed right now, so there are some possible targets already. Pause there for some more comments, questions, if anyone has them. Great action shot of someone using the skate park. So
Yes.
it's from earlier this summer, in fact. And parks, of course, are a form of public infrastructure that often gets missed in all the talk about roads and sewers and water pipes. So when we look at the corridors that we're going to be studying in the special study area module, the West 14-mile corridor, it was identified for mixed use in the last master plan. And there is indeed a mix of uses down that corridor. It's got a little bit of everything. There's a little bit of legacy industrial. There is commercial, and it's commercial in a wide variety of formats as well, from the sort of traditional 0 lot line buildings to more mid-century style strip malls. It really runs the gamut. We've got a little bit of office development down there. We have some legacy single family homes. There's a little bit of multifamily. It's the full range. And the last master plan had the whole corridor kind of one color on the future land use map, basically implying that a district should be developed. Zoning's never changed there. It's a real patchwork. There's some RM multifamily zoning, there is office zoning, there is B1, there's some B3. It's kind of all over the place. We also have our only RM2 property there, the Clausen Manor Tower as well is in that corridor, but we're not really looking at that site in particular. So really just kind of reassessing, okay, here's what the last master plan said about this corridor. The zoning didn't change at the time. Do we still think that the last master plan's assessment of this corridor holds up at this time, or do we need to change our thinking, or do we just need to define a few action items a little bit better and move forward with some sort of plan and kind of rethinking the zoning down this corridor? So that's gonna be a major topic of study. North Main, this is really kind of from, it's north of downtown, so we're going up to Elmwood and we're looking at what's going on down there. We know we have a planned unit development under development right now. And one thing that happens in some communities, and I can think of a couple communities that I work in, is that planned unit developments kind of run amok, and you get lots of them, and it sort of distorts the way you've planned your community. So if we can plan specifically in certain areas for certain types of development, it can turn down the need for the planned unit development, and it makes things a little bit more predictable for us. And you know, the planned unit development is always going to have its place. It can facilitate projects that just otherwise you couldn't possibly anticipate. But generally speaking, you know, we kind of want to know what we're anticipating for an area, and not kind of zone parcel by parcel via the planned unit development. One thing that we are looking at most likely for the North Main corridor is seeking greater flexibility, because a lot of that land is master planned office. And as anyone who lived through the last several years knows, demand for office is low. Occupancy of office development is low right now. It's rebounded a lot since the height of the pandemic, but it hasn't come back anywhere near where it was before the pandemic. What's that?
Know what it's at?
Right now across Southeast Michigan, I don't want to quote a number because I don't have it in front of me, but it is, in particular in certain areas, it's very, very low. And if you drive up and down, say 12 Mile, which is a major office corridor, or the Northwestern Highway, for instance, there are just for lease signs in front of every single building. There's a lot of challenges in the office market right now. Telegraph Road is the same story. There's just these big for lease signs in front of every building. So, you know, will we get back to greater occupancy over the next few years? Yes, to a degree, but we're never going to get back quite to the same thing we had before this pandemic. The technology has moved forward, and I think you're just going to have a lot more instances of people working either partially or completely from home in the future. And an office that used to have all 300 people who work there in the office every single day will have half of them there on Monday and Tuesday and the other half there on Wednesday and Thursday. So it changes everything about the way you have to think about the land around that building. Like parking, for instance, is a major consideration for office development. It takes up a lot of space. If you don't need half of it now, we need to be thinking about what could happen with that land, because it's not very valuable as parking. If you were able to put some sort of outlot development on it, it could become much more valuable. There's also just if you have office space that simply cannot get occupied, do you have the flexibility to convert it to something else without actually tearing the building down and changing the whole physical character of the site? Generally speaking, the answer is no under current zoning in this community and in most communities. Is there a way we can build some of that flexibility in there going forward so that, you know, we don't get caught with our metaphorical pants down when we have a major shift in demand in a particular sector? Our other corridors, the BRD1, I know not everybody is familiar with the zoning map, so this is really from the Royal Oak line up to about Nakota on South Main. And this is also a kind of wild mix of different uses right now. Several of them quite vibrant, and then other buildings that haven't had anything in them for quite a long time. So it's an area that was identified a couple master plans ago And this BRD1 district was developed for it. So we're going to be reviewing that to see if it meets the original intent or what the BRD1 district was supposed to do. And if there's any way that we can make adjustments to it to drive some positive change in that part of the corridor. BRD, by the way, stands for Business Renewal District. So if you were wondering what the acronym was for, I tend to throw around a lot of acronyms in this business without defining them. So I want to make sure that we let people know what they mean. So the other BRD district, the other business renewal district is BRD2. And as I said earlier, that's over on Crooks Road, and then it wraps along Maple Road. So we know that along Maple, there's a bunch of restaurants, there's a gas station, a couple of kind of midway between office and industrial type uses. It's quite a variety. And as you come down around the corner onto Crooks Road, the variety continues right down to Anderson Road. And then between Anderson Road and Elmwood, it is generally larger industrial buildings. And then south of Elmwood, there's a series of offices that are also in that district. And this was developed at the same time as the BRD1. We're going to be reviewing the original intent, looking at how the district is constituted today. Is it permitting the right things? Is it doing what it was originally intended to do? Is what it was originally intended to do still the thing we want it to do? There are lots of questions to ask, and we're going to be asking all of them and coming out on the other side of the process with a series of recommendations for how to make adjustments to that district, if any. Some of the largest taxpayers in the city are located there. We have to be mindful of that when we're studying the district. These are lots that are pretty big. That's a very rare thing in Clawson. So we've got to think about them going forward, and what happens if one of those uses goes away and somebody wants to split that up. Those all need to be considerations that we're thinking about now so that we're prepared if it happens. The other thing about this area is it includes areas that are further from neighborhoods than any other part of the city. Most of our commercial and industrial properties are very, very shallow. You draw a 200-foot ring around them and there's 50 houses in it. In this case, you can actually get pretty far from the neighbors if you're closer to Crooks Road. So another thing to think about when we think about what this area gets used for, there's also the airport, which you have to think about in terms of how tall things can get. And just what's going to be happening in the space above these buildings. We have that parking module as well. Of course, we're studying parking very specifically in the downtown plan for that area of the city, but we're going to be studying it throughout the community as well. So this module kind of bridges the general and downtown master plan updates. So in both plans, we're looking for locations with constrained supply and identifying opportunities for additional parking. We gave a little presentation to the DDA board not that long ago, identifying some potential opportunities to snag a few more spaces downtown, which we know are always at a premium during the very busy times, Friday night, Saturday night, things like that. And some of that happens in the city's right of way, for instance, on North Main, and then some of it happens outside of the right of way. And then around town, of course, you cannot park on the street overnight in the neighborhoods. And we're not looking at changing that, don't worry. But in our commercial areas, we do have a couple of kind of target areas where we know that there's a lack of supply, particularly along West 14 Mile. And we've had businesses actually contact us about it. Hasn't really happened for any other areas of the city, but nevertheless, we do have to be sensitive to that and see what kind of solutions we can come up with for people who seem to be experiencing a little bit of hurt right now as far as their business's access to adequate parking for their customer base.
How about surplus of parking over at the west end?
Yeah, there is a surplus of parking over there. And in fact, we have had pre-application meetings with the owners of the big strip mall there, where the Joe's Army Navy, et cetera, is. And we can't talk about it, but possibly something will be happening there. But there is definitely a surplus there. And there's a few other places where I think you could argue there's a surplus as well. But the other thing that we're doing is we're developing a framework for assessing our actual parking requirements relative to true demand for those uses. Because we have this, like every zoning ordinance, almost every zoning ordinance, we have this big table in our parking section that says if you're this use, you need to have this many parking spaces, and it might be like one space per 150 square feet of usable floor area or something like that. And most of those standards were developed a very long time ago. Most zoning ordinances in Michigan have their roots in the same 3 model zoning ordinances that were developed in the 1960s. And those parking tables have traveled forward from the 60s through time. And they've been adjusted here and there. You know, this cell got adjusted and this cell got adjusted, but for the most part, they're still rooted in the original parking requirements, which, if you really dig into it, were based on not much at all. There was really not a lot of data that went into those original parking requirements, and not a lot of study behind it. And we do have some guides. I know the Institute of Traffic Engineers has a parking generation manual, but even that, when you dig into it, has some flaws and some lack of support for some of those numbers. So we're kind of developing a framework that, and we'll be talking about it tonight, that will have kind of tiers of how we study it. There's sort of here's what we can do with the, typical load of work that we have. Here's what we could do if we had a little bit of budget to study it a little bit more. There are kind of a lot of different ways you can crack that egg. So that framework will detail all of them. But the ultimate goal is to change our zoning ordinance to make it work for modern development. Sustainability and resiliency, one of our modules. So the Sustainability Committee completed and the Planning Commission adopted a sustainability framework early this year. And established an extensive list of goals for further study. And what the Sustainability and Resiliency Plan module of this larger master plan does is develop an action plan around the goals of that framework. So really getting into the guts of how do we implement this, and how do we get to a point where we're doing some of the things that we're talking about in this plan, and being proactive about all of our sustainability goals. The action plan is going to be used as the basis for ordinance changes in some cases. In other cases, it might be more advocacy and education based. But nevertheless, that's going to pick up on the work that was done over the last couple of years by the Sustainability Committee, and give us a more actionable document that we can kind of take to the streets. As far as the Baker and Shalom sites are concerned, it's a little bit of a holding pattern right now because the school district has issued a couple of RFPs for redevelopment of those sites. Work was done on a draft update that was focused on those sites a couple of years ago. It was not adopted. The new plan really, it's just in conjunction with the school district to reflect the school district's planning for those sites. The goal ultimately is more families with children moving into the city and the school district. For the downtown plan update, I don't know why the style on this slide changed. That's kind of weird. The last downtown plan has led to real results in the form of new development downtown. And hopefully is going to be leading to more very soon. Attend tonight's planning commission meeting if you want to hear more about that. As downtown evolves, the plans need to move with it, of course, so things change and you have to replan once they've changed. We've got some public input topics lined up for the November workshop. We're going to be talking about building height as alluded to earlier. We're talking about public art. The district boundaries probably won't change. And then 14-mile road reconfiguration, some narrowing of the travel portion of the road in favor of some parking. And that's all going to be put before the public in November. The DDA will be discussing it in October in advance of that meeting. And I'll pause there for any more comments and questions, if anyone should have one. Or two, or three. We're coming up on 7, so seems like we're going to get through this in enough time to provide a good cushion before the planning commission meeting. If there's nothing. This is actually the last slide. So a little invitation to people to add their voice. Survey is going to be open through October. There's a URL for the survey there, and that QR code will take you right there if you use your phone. And again, we really do want to get as much feedback to that survey as we possibly can. We're pushing it out. I know Nick just pushed it out again a couple days ago. We had a little surge of people after he pushed it out. So it seems like every time it gets advertised, we get a little surge. So we're just hoping to, run the numbers up and really have some good data to work with the planning commission on. And we'll be providing opportunities on the downtown plan soon. So stay tuned for those. Like I said, November 14th is when that workshop is going to be for the public. So as you're thinking about your calendar, maybe make a little room for that.
Joe, I did have a question. You were going back to the BRD2. So the development of that area industrial didn't happen in a vacuum.
That's right.
Right. So obviously there was some coordination with Troy as far as their development. Right. Do they have any plans on revisiting any of those areas and how that might impact?
Their future land use map carries forward the existing use of the land across Crooks Road. Some of that's some of that is Troy. I think it's all Troy.
Yeah.
It's all Troy. Yeah.
All Troy Relics to the south,
Yeah.
Meyer.
Yeah, exactly.
And Birmingham Schools actually has the airport as part of their
Yeah, they do.
jurisdiction.
Yeah.
That's really strange.
That corner of Troy is the only part that's not in their district.
The only reason I bring it up because of the permanent development that happened over on Main Street, that potentially, with industrial and office use as that deteriorates in that corridor, what the potential could be for that thing being turned over into a development similar to what happened on Coolidge that Troy had as well.
Yeah, that is something to think about. I think in particular for the office properties south of Elmwood, they have kind of the footprint for small apartment complexes. So office is going in one direction, industrial is going in the other direction. The industrial vacancy rate in Southeast Michigan right now is 4%, which is insanely low. It hasn't been that low in a very, very long time, like many decades. So demand is high for that kind of space right now. And you can think about the kind of industrial users that you're thinking about, heavy stamping is probably not the right thing, for right next to houses, but, research facilities and that kind of thing, that could be very appropriate there. We definitely need to be prepared to respond to the fact that industrial demand is so high and supply is extremely constrained at the moment. In the 80s and 90s, most communities started letting, dance academies and gymnastics places come into their industrial districts because they had all this empty space and they needed to fill it. And now there's really high demand for industrial, and there's gymnastics places in the industrial buildings, and, the gymnastics places need to be somewhere. They're just as essential to a community as the industrial facilities themselves, but a lot of communities are starting to rethink all the extra uses that they allowed into their industrial districts now, because they're finding that people want to locate in their communities and can't, because there's just not opportunity or square footage.
I got one more question. Do we have the survey in a paper form? I know Nikki had talked about that about a month ago and there were some
We do,
issues.
yeah.
And where are they located at? Because I've been asked a couple of times.
We have copies of the master plan survey at each of our municipal buildings, City Hall, Library, Hunter, and the DPW.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, well, if there's no other comments, we can end the presentation portion of the meeting.
Nothing else for this evening? Nothing else for this evening?
That would conclude the workshop portion of the meeting.
Well, we'll be back here tomorrow at 7 p.m.
That's right.
If there are any deviations to Mr. Gary's plan, or to make the forefront by adding something new in, let's see. Come back tomorrow.
I'll put at least one new thing. I'll misspell something. See if you catch it.
Do we get a prize then?
Yeah, we'll come up with something.
Well, then, everyone have a great evening.